Hello, Calaveras County, and welcome to another edition of Mondo Calaveras. I'm your host, Mike Taylor. Now, today, folks, I'm personally thrilled to have the guest that I've got on today's show because I've known her for a long time. But what she helped get built in our county is probably one of the most overlooked treasure troves of history in the Mother Lode, the Sierra Nevada, never mind just Calaveras County. My guest is Pat Bradley, who helped get the Sierra Nevada Logging Museum built. Pat, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor to be here.
I just have to ask you real quick to give us sort of the quick history of your life around logging, because you grew up at the Blagan Mill, didn't you?
Well, my whole family's been interested in the timber business. We came down to Calaveras County in 1938 from Sierra County, and but actually, as far as the Blagan Mill is concerned, that was what American Forest ended up buying, which is now SPI now with 13 sawmills, and so it's been fortunate for my family because we've always been able to live in the mountains except for school. But as far as the museum itself, the Forest Service gets the credit for why we should have a museum.
Okay.
All the sacrifice and unbelievable experiences people had coming out here in 49 days, 6 months to cross the country, and babies being born and coming out here, and nothing here, not even a sawmill that would cut more than 55 boards a day, and people had to go a long time without, and what we have today is thanks to what they didn't have. And the Forest Service said we should have a museum to commemorate 18 counties from Redding down to Bakersfield.
Wow.
And they picked our area at the Blagan Mill because it was a very modern mill. My grandfather electrified it, but it was central between the area. So the 18 counties. And so our first big goal was to be with all these counties and have us exchange histories. Well, we got about 3 counties away and so much at home to do that we never got further than Tuolumne or Amador. But there are 18 counties, especially down around Merced and Fresno with the flumes. And so, we were just volunteers doing things for the first time. But the Forest Service is they're responsible. We should have a museum to commemorate the sacrifice.
And so how did the museum come about? I know that you and your late husband, Ron, were, in my eyes, pretty darned instrumental in sort of, I'll say, stirring the pot and kind of getting everybody moving. And I know you had a whole cadre of people who were helping out, kind of behind the scenes even. Yeah, well, the big thing in the first year, about 1998, was to get the 501c3 nonprofit. And my son, Barry Ward, being a businessman in Arnold and the great-grandfather of the Blagan family, felt obligated. And so he, with the Forest Service, actually Lisa Schwartz, who's now Gold Country Roasters owner in Murphy's, Barry and Lisa worked for a couple of years hard on getting the 501c3 together, and also the history of the 6.5 acres. Lisa was the one that researched that, and it had to have environmental impact study before it could even be given to the public. Now, is the land that the museum, and folks, in case you don't know, the Sierra Nevada Logging Museum is in White Pines. So that's, you take Blagan Road there out of Arnold, and you go in there to White Pines, which is not Arnold, and you get out to White Pines, and basically you kind of make the turn around Hazel Fisher School, and you're on Dunbar Road, and the museum is just kind of across White Pines Lake from White Pines Park. Right. And we'll get to all the fun that comes with all of that in just a little bit, but
As you got the museum going, and that property, is that CCWD property? Is that Calaveras County Water District?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's 6.5 acres, and there had to be about a 3-year environmental impact study.
Wow.
There were homes that were shacks for the workers for a while on that property, so everything there, fence posts and septic tanks and all had to be. And then so finally it was turned over to the public about 1991, and then it was all up to volunteers that knew nothing about museums, and there were loggers that were excited. And
who knew nothing about museums.
Right? And so it was the blind leading the blind. But we finally, started with our Jamboree. We started at White Pines Park and had a lot of fun on Labor Day weekend. We had a 2-day Jamboree in those days, and that went on for 3 or 4 years. And then the school was good enough to rent a 20 by 40 portable to us
right.
for 5 years. That was from 1995, I believe, to 2000, and never any money. We got some very nice checks from SPI and local people, 10, 15,000 local. I had an aunt that gave money, but we needed millions, and we never ever got any money from the government and or from the state. And so we finally, after school for 5 years, I had a very wonderful friend in Wilseyville. His name was Ray Stevens, and he's our hero because he was just an electrician from Oklahoma, and he had some property, and he said, I have no money. He was like an uncle to me, but I'll leave you my property. So he did, and I sold it for $50,000.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's the first money, that amount, and that we built the shell. And Dave Zukowski, he's the man who was the builder of the Arnold Library. He did a beautiful job building the shell. And so at that point we knew we'd finally have a museum, but we didn't know how in the world we were going to finish it. So it sat empty with no floor, no windows, no doors for 5 years. And in those days, that was 91 to 96 or so, we had a lot of snow. And it's a high building. Dan Krenitsky is our wonderful architect from Arnold, and he tried to design the mill, he designed the museum to look like the Blagan Mill with 3 stories.
Was that what inspired that look? Because it is an absolutely beautiful building.
Well, the mill is 3 stories with the workers on the 2 stories, and then the top is where the saw filer. That's a very important room.
Oh, sure.
And he's got to have a lot of light. So when you go into the museum, you see a lot of open windows way up high, and that's supposed to simulate the saw filer. So
I didn't realize that.
Thanks to Dan and his very, very reasonable cost and the $50,000 shell, it's a miracle. About 1997. I'm sorry. We opened in 2005. So it was about 2000. 3 men and my husband, who wasn't very well. The 3 men that were professional retired, 2 custom home builders and 1 electrician in their 70s, came out of retirement, worked for 6-8 hours every day every week for 2 years, and my husband was the gopher, Ron Bradley. And in 2 years' time, those men didn't take one penny for any pay, and we have today what they built, and they were professionals.
Boy, they really did.
And I asked a contractor how much that amount, and they said well over $1 million.
Oh, goodness.
And
wow.
I don't think we ever received more than about maybe $80,000 in cash. Maybe we got a lot of donated labor and some items discounted, but we needed millions.
Yeah.
And so we are very proud of the fact that especially these 3 men and their wives, really put the museum. We opened 2005.
Yeah,
that was 11 years ago.
And it's. We'll get to the inside of the museum in just a little bit. You mentioned it a moment ago, the logging jamboree, which is coming up in just a few weeks. It's Labor Day weekend on Saturday, so that is September 3rd this year.
Right.
And it's basically a day long. You can tour the museum. There are all kinds of logging competitions. And they're competitions, what I think is kind of cool, for both professionals and amateurs. Now, when they say amateurs, do they mean an amateur like me who doesn't know anything about it, or?
like Marita Calloway came in from 9 to 10 that morning.
Yeah.
Amateurs can come in and practice.
Practice,
And Marita
yeah.
was right there, and you bet. So
Yeah. And one of the neat things, one of the most fun events, especially to watch for the crowd, is the axe throw, because there's nothing better than seeing a can of beer explode when an axe hits it on the bullseye.
Yes.
But that whole competition and just the whole kind of afternoon is this really nice hangout. Of course, it gets a little noisy when the hot saws get going later on in the day. But the competitions are just, there's a little bit of boasting and a little bit of trash talk, but it's all very good-natured because you can tell that these people have worked together, if not competed, for years. So it's like old home week, if I were to be so bold to characterize the event. We've got a little bit of film, so let's take a look at the Sierra Nevada Logging Museum's Logging Jamboree.
One, two, three, go.
That wasn't too bad.
That is just a taste, and I'm kind of sorry there weren't any of the axe throws there, but I won't say anything. But the competition goes on for most of the day, but the beauty of the Logging Jamboree is that you can tour the museum while folks who are very familiar with it are there. And Pat, I got to tell you, the thing about the Sierra Nevada Logging Museum that is the most amazing are some of the models and the exhibits inside. How did those come about? Because there are some, I mean, I want to call them erector set dream toys for kids, because there are some big, beautiful replicas of the mills.
We only have one person out of the county, and he's just barely out of the county, Stuart Heller from Twain Hart, and he built our sawmill. And it took him 3.5 years. And his wife said he was so engrossed it was hard to get him to come in for lunch. And he's got recorded sounds from the mill that took 3.5 years. And then, of course, our wonderful executive director, John Hofstetter, he can find history on just about anything. And he has dug up history, like we have the film that it was completed in 1936, 80 years ago, but it starts in 1911 before World War I, and it's got the 9,000-foot incline at Yosemite.
Oh my
that's unbelievable, and that's where our Shea locomotive that we have, it was actually took part in that film.
Wow!
And so that's when you see this number 40, that's number 4.
Number 4.
That's the one that we have.
That's a whole nother, I mean, we could do a whole nother half-hour show. Just get Patrick Carnahan here and go through that.
That's right.
Because that was something. I mean, seeing the bits and pieces of that locomotive roll up Highway 49 and then up Highway 4 and then out there to White Pines.
4.5 days from Boulder City, Nevada.
Yeah.
Up to, got a ticket in Angels Camp after 4.5 days at Angels Camp because we were 3 feet too long, 125 feet.
Oh my gosh.
122 was max. We paid a $200 fine, and it was stalled just an hour. We got a lot of PR, and it came up. But so.
Well, and that, folks, is the locomotive that you saw there on the outside of the museum, and that's another beautiful thing about the Sierra Nevada Logging Museum, Pat, is that the exhibits aren't just inside.
That's right.
There's an incredible amount of equipment outdoors that is what was doing this labor way back when.
That's right. And 22 of them, Mike, and the last 3 years, thanks to Mike Skenfield, our exhibit director, and his family, there are new signs that are very easily understood. In other words, I'm a music teacher. I could understand what they did and what it was used for because of how. So when we're not open, which is a lot of the time, people can still enjoy those 22 exhibits.
And that's it. During the summertime, the museum is open Thursday through Sunday?
Good memory. Yeah, 12 to 4.
Noon to 4, yeah.
And if we can recruit more help, we do need volunteers. It's once or twice a month to put in 4 hours. It's an enjoyable job because of the terrain. We're at 4,000 feet. We've got the park across the way. It's good swimming and 4-pound trout in the lake. I mean, if you have family that come with the docent.
Sure.
And by the way, docent isn't anything. It has to be super training. We say docents, which we mean volunteers. And it's if anybody's interested, I think by the time people realize we need the help, it's when we're about ready to close in November.
Yeah, that's about right. But what they could do is get their names in the hat so that they're ready when you open up, because it's in April that
Good
you begin
memory,
again.
Mike. Yeah.
Once in a while, these things stick in my head. Now, we've got some other footage, folks, so let's take a look at that, because this gives us a better look at the inside of the Sierra Nevada Logging Museum. Go for it.
We've set up a large diorama here done by Stu Heller. And in this diorama, we're showing how early logging equipment is used. And across the hall from it, we have a lot of that logging equipment, the tools, set up on the wall, including the huge electric chainsaw that's shown in one of the videos. We have it shown in the models how it's all set up. But as you can imagine, that's a real person killer. We managed that saw, and it was attached by cord to a generator that was sitting on the back of a pickup or a tractor. And the generator gave the power to the saw, and they had to move around the woods, dragging cable behind them.
Stop the building!
What we have here is what we've considered one of the logging marvels of the world. This had the objective of moving large timber, cut up large timber by log, from a point high up on a mountain down a steep slope of 3,000 feet to a railroad at the bottom. And this all happened at El Partel area on the Merced River just outside of Yosemite. And a logging company had property way above, and they were logging just large logs at that time. and they had a whole railroad set up on the top side that could bring it to the top of the mountain. And then they had to get it 3,000 feet down without going back and forth and back and forth. So this just very interesting engineering feat of figuring out how to do a cable operation that actually ran a full load down and brought an empty up. And then next full load goes down, picks up an empty, comes back up. So they're all tied together and have to go by gravity, the force of gravity bringing them down. Now there is a control in the little shack up there. It goes through drums that can actually break things. But basically it went by the gravity system where this set of logs is going down, an unloaded set is coming up, and then they take it back into the woods, fill it up, bring them back down again, and so on. So we thought it was just amazing, and we have a actual video that was taken back in that time that tells how it operates. So when you're here at the museum, you can watch that video and see the whole process. This was a fun exhibit for us to be involved with because it did involve some of our ladies as part of the museum organization who actually grew up in this area and were living in forest camps such as we're depicting here. We'd have a small cabin and they might have a little garden out there, but they were here all summer long as a family where the father was going to work in the woods. And so we asked them to help us with outfitting this, and we went ahead and designed what they described, and they brought in some of their artifacts. And the dress on the lady is actually the dress of one of the person's grandmother who actually spent time in the logging camps. I got a kick out of the fact that when we were first starting here, we were trying to find mannequins, and we had to go to the typical mannequin that you'd have in a clothes store, very effeminate type, and no doubt many of the women, all of the women out there were very feminine, but this was just a little too much to anybody's satisfaction, so they tried to dress her a little more roughened up, but it was a task. So of course all the men enjoy coming through and look at her because she's a beautiful lady, and it was fun to put this exhibit together. This is one of probably our most intricate models done by Stu Heller, who studied all the aspects of the lumber mills of the 30s and 40s era and actually visited some of them, visits with some of the people. What he's shown here is the whole process of taking the log from what's called the mill pond. Now logs were brought into a mill pond and they could stay in the water, and that minimized insect attack from boring beetles, etc. It also made the logs easier to cut because they were kept at a good moisture. So it comes into the top, and this model actually brings the log up in, and then he has a voice that we're not going to hear right now, but he has a voice telling you all the steps you go through. And he's done this careful job of taking little tiny electric motors and making everything work. Obviously, you can't saw the wood, but the saws are turning, and it's actually cutting off what's called cants and laying them off. They're distributing to where they go, being cut where they're edged, taking the bark off the edge, and then they're cut in lengths through here. Each of these little saws works in progression as you follow through. Then he describes how the lumber comes down to those people that are actually grading it and selecting it, and they're sending it different directions. And then finally gets all stacked to go into a dryer to take moisture out of it so it won't warp as much. And then the final operation is where they're planing it and then loading it onto the flatbed of...
That model is just a marvel. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. But what's, for me as a former Tonka trunk loving kid, mm-hmm. It's like looking at a real-life erector set. It's that model, because it was actually based on an actual sawmill. It's just amazing that somebody came up with all of that machinery to do this work in such a rough and tumble kind of environment. It was not an easy life to be a logger.
Nope.
And it was not easy to live in the camps either, but I imagine they had their share of fun.
Well, the most important thing, Mike, was the food.
Yes,
More,
I can
not
imagine.
the pay, not
Yeah?
the pay. And if the food wasn't good, they wouldn't stay.
Oh,
it had to
okay.
be not just quantity, but quality.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
because loggers never had a problem getting a job. And they lived where they wanted to live, and they liked to work, but their food had to be quality.
Oh,
And that's
okay.
that's a fact.
I'll be darned.
And so nowadays, people worry about it's not. They worry more about the pay and not the food.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I think that says a lot. And I was going to ask you if you've seen on television some of the amazing machines now that are used to harvest timber.
Oh,
and there's darn near no people out there except the guy sitting in the cab operating
And the sawmills,
the machine.
the sawmills, the Sonora mill, I understand is all. But my grandfather, when he was in his early 60s, he was a sawyer. He passed away. Of course, he liked his beer, but he had so much sawdust in his system because of the lack of protection.
Good ventilation.
And that's was one of the reasons he didn't live past, I think, 63. And now there's a piece of glass between the sawyer and the log, and you're pushing buttons, and it's come a long way.
You're in a little air-conditioned room. And
your wife has maternity
right.
insurance. You have to have a coffee break.
There you go. That's right. Well, we're getting a little short on time, Pat, so I want to make sure we get the details about the logging jamboree out there. It's September 3rd this year. I hope folks can make it up there. It's at the museum. Starts about 9 in the morning, and that's when it's a little bit more on the casual side. That's before everything gets a little bit more scheduled and regimented. But what I would recommend is, especially for a family that has medium-age kids, if the kids are too young, the museum is not going to do too much for them except be stuff that's moving around, and they're going to want to play with it. I'm not saying don't interest your kids in history, but be careful about going in there. You got to keep an eye on them. But the museum is open all day. It's $8 for adults. Kids under 14 and under are free. Couples get in for $16. Each, 15, excuse me, you're right. Yes, $15 each. And there's barbecued food, there's all kinds of good fun, and it's really an interesting event that mixes history and a good old-fashioned summer afternoon out by White Pines Lake.
That's right.
If it gets too hot, you can jump in the lake, so there you go.
Or fish and catch the 4-pound trout.
There you go. Well, Pat Bradley from the Sierra Nevada Logging Museum, thank you so much for being
welcome,
here.
Mike.
And ladies and gentlemen, support that museum. You have to. I'm Mike Taylor. Join me next time on Mondo Calaveras. Until then, enjoy.